This is Tom Kane, the voice of Yoda in Star Wars The Clone Wars, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
The cruiser's still jamming our comms.
I still can't believe you let Omega turn herself in.
The Empire would have destroyed this whole town. She stopped them. Our best shot at grabbing Rampart is to intercept them when they're en route from the mine.
Take on a turbo tank? Yeah, now you're talking.
Then you must need something from me.
Tantus base. Where is it?
Ah, Tantus.
Did you know an individual's M count cannot be directly replicated?
This is Vanessa Marshall, Harrison Dula from Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
It's time, friends, once again to dive into Star Wars The Bad Batch. We are on the 12th episode in Season 3. We are so close to the end. We've got so much more conversation to be had. So we are joined by two guests. First, my regular co-host for all things Star Wars The Bad Batch, Mason Zehr. Mason, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be back again.
Also joining us on the show, he is a returning guest, a longtime friend of the show and a very loyal member of the CWK family, Jason Mach. Jason, welcome back to the show.
Well, thanks for having me back. It's a lot of fun to be on the show. It's good to see you guys again, and looking forward to talking about the Bad Batch.
Yeah, likewise. We're going to have Henrik on too, but his schedule did not permit it. So we certainly say hello to you, Henrik, and look forward to having you on the show in the future.
Yeah, he's got a much more complex schedule than I do. I pretty much just wake up, work, and kind of do my thing here. So,
yes, I think Mason might be in a similar camp. Camp is interesting because we spent a lot of time in an Imperial camp. It is an Imperial work camp, but we're going to talk about that first as we start all these episodes. When we look at a show or series, we have one word to describe the episode and overall thoughts. Mason, let's start with you.
Yeah, my one word is intercept, because they have to go and intercept the vehicle that Admiral Rampart is in, and you just get that feeling, oh, something is coming.
All right, that sounds like a good one. I'm looking forward to, I never know what you're going to say, so that's always fun. Jason, what about you? One word and overall thoughts.
Yeah, well, my one word is hyphenated.
Oh, yeah.
You got to keep that going.
Yes.
I know Father Jimmy did that last week. So my word is laser focused. I was going to pick the word quick because it was a quick episode, but I felt like laser focused was a little more descriptive because this one's pretty much, it's very straight to the point. There's nothing really drawn out in it. I mean, it's just kind of full speed ahead. They've got an objective and they're going right after it. Just the way the story progresses, so many things happen. There's just not a lot of, I don't want to say fluff, but it's just not drawn out. Like they don't have a ship to get off the planet. Oh, now they've got Fee and her ship. They don't know how to find Tantus. Oh, guess what? Crosshair knows how to find Tantus, or at least knows someone who might know how to find Tantus. And even with the slow-moving, slow-talking Dr. Hemlock, when he's talking to Omega there on Tantus, he doesn't kind of draw out the conversation when he's explaining to her some things about what's happening there. He just kind of tells her. So it's straight ahead, laser focus, just going right through it.
Yeah, you're right. I noticed that too. We watched this several times, and I thought about it. Boy, Hemlock is so slow and plodding, but almost like a viper. Like it just kind of curls up and looking at you, and all of a sudden it will strike. And you just never know when he's going to do whatever he's going to do. And we haven't even seen him. We certainly haven't seen him in combat. We haven't needed to. But he's pretty interesting. But my word for this episode is heroic. There are a lot of wonderfully heroic things. It's a very action-heavy episode, but Star Wars, one of the things it's predicated on is amazing action. I think there's some heroic stuff in the sound mixing, too. While I don't think there's a ton to analyze per se. I do think and that's okay, by the way. It doesn't have to be, everything doesn't have to be, as complex as The Last Jedi or different aspects of Andor. But it is very entertaining, and certainly we had a lot of chances to see heroism. The opening sequence, I really, really like the music. I feel like I'm more aware of it because of Stranger Things. But in the 80s, heavy synthesizer was used to give like this scary, creepy, sinister feeling. And we hear a lot of that in this opening sequence with Clone Trooper X landing in his dagger, which is the name of his ship. Omega gets out. The synthesizer is very heavy. It's dark, like a very late dusk on the planet and of Tantus, of course. And then Hemlock just coolly says to Omega, something like, "You were wise to turn yourself over," something to that effect. And then you see Omega. She has Mason. I noticed this. The animation. This is cool. And Mason had a cool observation about the animation. That Mason, what did you notice about it?
Yeah, I noticed this one was animated, and it made it look like live action animation. It was kind of a mix of both.
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
It kind of looked like a 3D cartoon, like more realistic drawings, but they're still cartoons.
And I love that, and I think that it helps because Omega is particularly expressive. She doesn't strike me as scared. I think she's uncomfortable. I think she's not happy. And it's almost like, I don't know that I want to say she's scolding Hemlock, but she is very adamantly frustrated. And I think she feels a little hopeless, a little bit. I don't know, Jason, what do you make of this opening sequence?
Well, I like the 2 points that you both mentioned with the animation. I don't know if it struck me so much there at the beginning, but definitely later in the episode when the batch is going after the Juggernaut. I remember there being a moment where I thought, man, this animation seems even better than it was in the past couple of weeks. It just looked so realistic and lifelike. And then with the music, that was the first note that I had written down here. Just that
first note. I like that.
Yeah, I didn't even mean to do that. Just those opening, like, ominous, almost pulses. There were just these hanging notes there as the ship flew in. That just set the tone for that whole sequence there. And I did think Omega carried herself with a good amount of poise and confidence. But yeah, I have to imagine that going back to that place was not something that made her feel very good, made her feel very comfortable at all. And especially just walking off the ship and there's Hemlock standing right there waiting for her,
And there's not excess security. He doesn't appear to think she's a flight risk or something like that. Her eyes seem especially brown, very, very insightful, very expressive. I applaud Lucasfilm Animation for the work, just especially on this opening sequence. And I agree, throughout the entire episode, whenever we see planets or larger buildings, I mean, the animation almost looks like you're looking at a Ralph McQuarrie painting. Mm-hmm. Really comes to life. Mm-hmm. Emery shows up, Dr. Emery Carr. I'm still not certain if Hemlock knows that Emery is a clone of Omega. I just don't know. I don't ever remember being said. I don't know. I feel like that makes a big difference on the dynamic here, because if he does know that she's a clone, when he asks her to test Omega and he says, "I'll be right back," I did say to Mason, why is he leaving? If it was so important, if he scoured the galaxy twice over to find her, and now he's got her where he wants her, he doesn't want to wait and see the results of the test? I thought that was odd, but I think what Mason and I pieced together, and Mason, feel free to interject here, is that it must take a long time.
I would agree with that too, because there was a moment where, Emery took the blood sample, and then I think it cut away to something else, and then we came back, and it looked like Omega was just kind of sitting there on that table or seat or whatever it was, almost looking bored. Like they're just kind of hanging around waiting for the result to come through. Yeah, it was interesting. I wonder how much time did pass.
I caught that too, and I don't know if it was it any darker. Mason, did you ever notice if it was any darker at the end?
No, I did not.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out. It could have been quick, or it seems like it's laborious or time consuming. And I also feel like she looked a little defeated, like a little melancholy or sad, but definitely bored as well. And sometimes they can go along with one another. One of my favorite lines, though, in this, in fact, I think the best line, at least at the beginning of this episode, is Emery saying, "You're safe." And she looks up, Omega looks up at Emery and she says, "Am I?"
Yes.
But it wasn't like asking a question. It was very, it was like a rhetorical question. I really was impressed by that response.
Yeah, I like that too. It was kind of creepy.
It was.
And then I think as soon as she said that, we shifted to another scene. If I remember correctly, I think we moved to another scene and we're just left hanging there. And I don't think we even saw Emery's response to that, did we?
No.
Yeah.
We did not. Mason, anything else you want to talk about Dr. Carr and Omega chatting before we move on?
Just like I even realized about the animation, like even her goggles had that look to it.
They did. They were very three-dimensional, I think is a really good way to explain it, Mason. So I love that. So now we go back to Pabu, and Hunter is, it's basically almost instantaneous from the episode before. He's running. He goes back to where they've been stationed or where they've been spending their time. Wrecker and Crosshair there. And the three of them have a very short conversation, but I think an interesting conversation. And it very much shows the dynamics of the three of them, how they're handling the fact that Omega's gone, sort of their thought process for the next round of things. What from this conversation jumped out to the two of you?
Well, one thing that stuck out to me was, I think it was Wrecker kind of questioning Crosshair, or at least talking to Crosshair about, how could you let Omega, give herself up and be taken by the Empire? And Crosshair's response was a reiteration of the plan that Omega had come up with. And it was that scene in that last episode was just really, I don't know. I love how their relationship has evolved, Omega and Crosshair. And like she persuaded him and just gave him an argument that he could not refute. And so here, Wrecker was in a way challenging that, or at least questioning it, and Crosshair came right out and said it had to be done. There was no other way.
Yeah, the Empire is going to destroy this whole town, and she saved them. She saved them, is what he says, and then he says, "Yeah, and they've got her again." But I think my thing that jumps out to me the most on this is that Wrecker is a little frustrated. Crosshair is very somber, but they don't get mad at each other. They're mad, they're frustrated, but if this would have happened before Crosshair defected to the Empire, and he was just Crosshair as how we met him in the Clone Wars, I feel like this conversation would have gone a little bit differently. Well, they've had to have been physically separated. Mm-hmm. But this again, I think this is nice character stuff because it shows they're still in character. They're still expressing themselves. Crosshair still feels. I think Crosshair is still very much walking a line of seeking retribution and redemption for himself, even though he knows he's completely forgiven by his brothers. I think he still is going a long way to try to forgive himself, which shows again when he announces, "Hey, I think we might be able to find Tantus." Mesa, what stands out to you about any of this conversation with the three of them?
I'm just going to jump to the big point in it when he says the words Admiral. You're just like, oh my goodness. Is this really happening?
Yeah, why? Why was that exciting for you?
Because just season 1 and how I got thrown in jail, you knew they're going to try to get him out of the jail somehow.
So yeah, we may as well talk about him. Admiral Rampart, he is the key to Tantus, and Crosshair brings it up. Wrecker gets mad and he says, look, no, I'm not saying I know, but I feel like Rampart might have the coordinates. It was a nice surprise. Jason, talk about Rampart returning, and what do you think about him as a character?
You know, it was funny that he was in this episode because it wasn't that long ago when I was just thinking to myself, I wonder what happened to that guy.
Yeah.
Because he was such a focal point of the story, and then, you know, he got his plan got exposed, or his his involvement in the destruction of Tapoka City got exposed, and the Emperor sort of turned his back on him and allowed him to get arrested, and that's the last time we saw him. He just disappeared right off the radar, and I was wondering the other day, what happened to that guy? I wonder where he is. Well, now we know where he is and what he was doing. I wasn't expecting that to come up. That's not the source that I thought Crosshair was going to point to. But in a way, I think it is kind of neat to see him back in the story because he was such an integral part of it earlier on.
He said, Wrecker says, why didn't you bring this up before? And Crosshair gives two reasons. He says, I didn't want to go back to Tantus, and Rampart isn't exactly someone that we can trust. But Mason, you noticed something when we were watching it. When he talks about returning to Tantus, do you remember what he does?
Yeah, he looks down in his hand and it shakes. Like, it used to shake a little when he was shooting, but it shakes a lot.
Yeah, that's that psychosomatic reaction to knowing that place just there. It just does something to him. But nevertheless, they decide we've got to get Rampart. We've got to use him to help us because they do say he is their last option, which brings them pretty quickly to the Imperial labor camp. But before that, we get the return of Fee. Jason, talk about that little sequence there.
If I could just back up real quick,
please, yeah,
on Crosshair and talking about Tantus and Rampart. Yeah. I also noticed him kind of rubbing his hand and holding his hand and his hand shaking. I also noticed, because he and Hunter were pretty close to each other, I think, when they were having this conversation. I think Hunter also a couple of times glances down at Crosshair's hand, like, he notices this thing happening, and I just thought, what a moment of vulnerability right there. I mean, especially with Crosshair, because he was, when we first meet him, the guy is just a jerk. I mean, straight up jerk. And he's probably the most guarded of all of the Bad Batch. But here he is showing this very real physical response to a very deep traumatic event in his life, and it's right in front of one of his brothers, and his brother's looking at that happening. Man, what a moment of vulnerability and emotion. And Hunter doesn't really respond to it too much. I think he's aware of it. I think he acknowledges it, but he stays focused. He keeps the conversation focused there. So I was
very much respects it too, the vulnerability, because that's I'm glad you brought that up. Such a key part of this. I didn't mean to cut you off there. You said something else at the end.
I forgot what I was going to say, but I think I was pretty much done.
Okay. The vulnerability there, and there's a level of respect that this bugs you. So he doesn't push it, but they just know there's no need to talk about it, because for all of them, it's about Omega, and that's it.
Yes. And
the fact that Crosshair is willing to and wants to passionately fight through that for her, and he does explain why, and it's pretty great. It's pretty great. So Fee shows up. Mason, what do you think about Fee as a character?
Yeah, at first we were like, I'm not sure she's trustworthy. But I think in this episode she proves that she can help the Bad Batch and she is trustworthy to them.
Very much. Very much. She is the reason that they're able to go to this Imperial work camp. She said it was a pretty pricey sum to get the information. We also find out that there's all these tunnels on Pabu that she's able to go around. There's these hidden caverns. And then she has a really quick interaction with Crosshair. And then a reference to Brown Eyes, which, of course, is her nickname that she had for Tech. Yeah. And that was a nice little moment right there.
Yeah, that actually made me choke up a little bit the first time I heard it. I was really happy to hear her reference Tech 2 times. Once by the name Tech, and then the second time she called him Brown Eyes.
Oh, yeah.
And I think she's referred to him in the past. I think there was maybe a holographic transmission she had with the Bad Batch a few episodes back. I seem to remember something like that, where she also mentioned his name. So I really like that she's continuing to talk about him and bring his name into the present moment. Obviously she had some feelings for him. That's why she called him Brown Eyes, and there was clearly something there. She's human, and she's mourning, I'm sure, and she's hurting, but it's really kind of a beautiful thing to see, right? And to hear her use his name and bring him into the present moment and not just leave him in the past, and she does it in a way where she's not like just totally overcome with grief.
Right.
She's sad, but at the same time, she's been able to move on, and she's kind of bringing him or his memory along with her. So I really appreciated that. And I like that they have her in this episode as well, because she interjects a lot of lightheartedness to this story. And it's not a heavy story like we've had in the last few episodes, but it's a very serious one.
Yes.
They've got a very serious objective, and we're heading toward the end of the series here. So I think it was really nice to have that lighthearted element. And just one more thing, if I could say about that, I thought it was funny. Well, it didn't actually happen in the show, but I thought to myself, when she calls Tech Brown Eyes, I think she's talking to Crosshair.
Yeah.
I have to imagine there's a tiny piece of Crosshair's mind where he's asking himself, how much did I miss while I was gone? What happened between Tech and Fee? And she's calling him Brown Eyes. And how much did I miss? I think it's funny. I don't know if that was actually in his mind, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was a little piece somewhere that was like, wow.
Right. I get it. I totally get it. And it even shows that there's a lot of conversations they had that we weren't privy to, because she says, Tech told me about your sparkling personality, which of course, Crosshair and sparkling, not usually going together in any kind of a sentence, but she reveals the fact that she's able to get them access to the space. And then we finally get to meet Rampart. Instead of going through everything beat by beat, let's just talk about rescuing Rampart, the action sequences. Let's just talk about things that jumped out to us, scenes that we liked in the last half of this episode. And Mason, throw something out there and we'll talk about it.
Let's just talk about when they first get on there, and when that trooper that comes up top, they don't show the scene, but they probably just throw him on the ground, off of the tank, whatever, boat almost, but not on water.
Right.
And then they don't show it, but that's my guess what they did. And then they come down, and then the trooper says, "Is there anything?" And Wrecker says, "Yeah," and punches him in the face and knocks him out.
There are 2 or 3 times where Wrecker has a funny line in this, and it's all, and I think much like you said about Fee, it's a really kind of a nice way to sort of lighten up things. Do you know what I mean? To kind of add a little bit of levity, because he says, "Take on a turbo tank? Yeah, now you're talking." Also, when they are playing this, he says, "Give us a real challenge," which in reality is going to be a tremendous challenge. So Wrecker and Fee, a lot of fun. But I feel like this is kind of a fun little Wrecker's greatest hits too.
Yes, he's a very quotable person.
He is. And I also want to point out, and Jason, I want to hear some of yours too. I really like the entrance, the stealth entrance into this planet. It's called Aramis, I believe, which sounds like a cologne too, if I'm not mistaken. But the stealth thing where she basically turns everything off and goes through undetected, and they're going really, really fast. she never tells them to put on to buckle up or put on their seatbelts, and doesn't even seem to be much of an issue. But that's fine. It's not supposed to be realism. It's science fantasy. But I really like that scene. It was cool to see Fia's besides just kind of this quizzical, impish character, but someone we always know she has a plan. She's always in control. And I just like that stealth approach. I thought it was just kind of a cool little way to sort of spotlight her character, because this really isn't her story. She's hardly in it, but I thought it was a nice little homage for her.
It was, and that was actually one of my two favorite scenes in this episode. First of all, I love how she calls it a stealth approach.
Yes.
I mean, she pretty much just cuts the engines and they free fall down through the atmosphere. And I love that she calls it a stealth approach. That move actually reminded me of something that Tech would do. And it was another moment. I don't know if it was just the way she was moving the controls, or she was so smooth. It was flawless. Clearly, this was not the first time she's done it. Just the way that she did it, she was calm. It reminded me of a move that Tech would have done. And it was just another really heartwarming aspect of this, for me. And another reason I'm glad that they had Fee in this episode. I love how she took her finger and just swiped it across a row of buttons and shut them off. She was doing something with her feet, with some pedals down on the floor. I don't know if she was just bracing herself or if
pulled them under. I've always thought about what happens when you're driving if you pull the accelerator from the bottom towards you, and that's what she did on both of them. And I thought that was, I don't know, that was very satisfying to watch. Can't really
I don't know if there was anything functional about that, or if it was her bracing herself because she knew what was coming next. But I loved that whole scene. That whole moment was just great. And I'm sure you guys noticed this, but there were a couple of shots. It was quick, but as they're plummeting down, Hunter's helmet is just kind of floating in the air right next to him. I don't know if he sees it. He doesn't really look at it, but it's just kind of floating there in the air as they're plummeting down with no engines. That was another fun little lighthearted detail, I think, to bring some balance to an overall serious storyline.
Right. It's like a classic World War II movie where you infiltrate, like The Great Escape, but in reverse, sort of. So Mason, what else is something that's fun about this episode with the capture of the tank, the turbo tank?
Let's just talk about when they jump from the tank thing into the ship.
To Fee's ship at the end. Yeah, tell me about that.
Yeah, they all get there. They just toss Rampart up there. And he's still stunned. And then
I love that.
Wrecker's like, bring it closer, and they're like, just jump. And he steps back. Even though you can't see his eyes because of his helmet, he's going, oh no, with his eyes. And then he runs and jumps and is about to slide off as he holds on, but then the Bad Batch pull him up.
Plus, you made me think of something when you said that. Let's not forget that Wrecker is terrified of heights, or he was.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's had so much experience and practice with it that he's very much working to that. That's kind of a nice character thing that they're not spotlighting. But Mason, I wrote that down too. This is the second episode in a row. Well, not second episode in a row, but second episode in a couple of weeks where I thought Wrecker. No, it is the second one in a row. I thought Wrecker's going to die. I was afraid. I thought he's not going to make this jump. When the episode before, when he got knocked unconscious and he was out for a long amount of time, I thought this is the second time in a row that they're doing this to me with Wrecker. And the more lovable they make him, the more I worry about what's going to happen with him. So to see him make that, and I like that you pointed out, Mason, that you couldn't see his face. So you don't really know if he's like, which he probably was, as you mentioned. So that was pretty, that was a good little thrilling moment. Because again, we're in this very fascinating place where we're attached to these characters. We love these characters. We have no idea what their future is. So anything can happen. If Tech didn't die in the second season, I wasn't happy that he died, of course. Are you kidding me? But the fact that we know these clones are mortal and something can happen to them makes a sequence like that, which normally would just be a throwaway, fun little Star Wars moment, it gives it some weight to it.
It does. And Mason, I'm glad you brought that up. I wasn't too worried last episode when the Clone X Trooper blew up the Marauder and Wrecker was flung into the water. I was actually more upset about the Marauder than I was about Wrecker because I just didn't figure that was how he would go out, you know?
Mm-hmm.
In this episode, I was legitimately scared for Wrecker. I really wasn't sure if he was going to make that jump because that was a big jump and he's a big dude. And I don't know if he's got the springs in his legs to get him across that gap. But he did, thankfully.
He did. It worked out really, really well. Is there anything else you want to talk about in this entire escape sequence, Jason?
I think the one other thing that I liked was when they hijacked the Juggernaut and Hunter got behind the controls and he's driving it. I thought that was really metaphorical for their mission. And it gets back to my one word, laser focused. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was not going to stop for anything or anybody. They could put any barricades in the way, could put any ships in the way, could put anything in his way. He was not stopping. He was determined to get off that planet with Rampart and get on with the larger mission of rescuing Omega. And it just, it really showed the way he drove showed their determination to rescue Omega. And I loved it. I thought it was great. I loved the skid turn that he did. Yeah. I loved before that, I think the jump that he did where they blew out the tire or the wheels on the approaching Juggernaut and then they jumped over it. When I saw that in my head, I thought, oh, we need the A-Team theme song right here. And Mason, you're probably a little too young to remember the A-Team. But man, as soon as I saw that thing go airborne, I thought, oh, that'd be great to have the A-Team theme song right there. Cause that's something that they would have done. It was just, what an exciting sequence. That was my other favorite in the episode.
Same. I wrote that down too. I love it. The tank versus the bridge slowly being sealed. And I love that you make it a metaphor. I hadn't thought about that. It's Hunter's determination. Obstacles are thrown in the way, but he powers through with his ability and his responsibility to take care of Omega. And it really works really, really well. Plus it's got some wonderful sound mixing that I talked about at the beginning of the show. David W. Collins and everyone at Lucasfilm did such a great job with the explosions, the smoke that comes out, the turrets moving around, the clicks of all of that. It really came to life and is a nice reminder of one of the reasons that I like Star Wars so much is the sound effects and like Heiner Brothers score. The mixing of this is incredible. I mean, I know what mixing looks like when I'm doing a podcast edit. That is like an anthill compared to New York City, which is Lucasfilm trying to put one of these together. And it is really, really well done. Mason, what did you like about the tank escape with the bridge or anything with that little sequence?
Yeah, I just liked how he kept going through those like things that were closing in, basically barricades, and he just like smashed them over.
Plus, we get a great moment of the hero's journey. Outside help or rescue where Fee shows up with her ship, as we talked about, and saves them. The only other main thing I want to talk about that I think is important is Crosshair and Rampart and the interrogation sequences they have with one another. Rampart feels pretty smug, even though it's probably just a ruse because he wants to get off that planet is worse than they do, maybe, because he's been there for so long. He's been humiliated. He was an admiral, a vice admiral, I believe. And now he's a prisoner for the Empire he tried to serve and protect. In his way, he was a scapegoat for Palpatine, but I think most people in the galaxy at this point are in one way, shape, or form. But the fact that he keeps saying, "No, you're going to kill me," and Crosshair says, "What does he say? Tempting?" He says, "Tempting," and obviously he doesn't. What I like about this is they could very easily go into like this thing where Crosshair is a loose cannon or he's reckless or he's just on the verge of snapping. But it's really the opposite. he's not even really restraining himself. He's grown. He's changed. He's matured. He has a different focus. So that old part of him is still there, but he does not tap into that or even give it any kind of weight or credibility because he's got a plan. He needs Rampart to help find the coordinates to Tantus so that they can get Omega back. And so he's pretty much the main one that moves him around. He ends up stunning him. But overall, whenever the two of them talk, especially the end when Crosshair just dumps his bucket and says, no, look, we need the coordinates to Tantus. He doesn't try. It is not like saying you'll find out or something sinister or not keeping his cards close to his vest. He tells everything right away. He makes himself vulnerable, to use what you said before, Jason, to Rampart because he wants Omega back. Again, very subtle character stuff, but very nuanced and very well done.
Yes, I agree.
Mason, what about Crosshair for you in this episode?
Yeah, he was just very calm and under control, and he didn't show like any sign of like I want to go back to the Empire, which he hasn't any. So yeah, he's definitely growing. Agreed.
And then at the end, Omega's shown the vault. And there's talk of a transfer of M count to another sample. And Mason and I were saying, what other sample is he talking about? Is it which of these kids is it? Is it something else? We don't know. And of course, I don't speculate because I just don't have that skill set, and nor do I want to have it. But it ends on a cliffhanger where you just feel like you feel as oppressed as Omega, because not only are you worried about what's going to happen to her, it seems like a pretty inescapable situation, but also she looks like, oh, what am I going to do? But she's Omega, right? She's amazing. Is there anything else about the episode that we want to share before we give our letter grades?
Well, on the note of Omega walking into that room, I think that was the first time that I felt like she was actually kind of shaken in her time back on Tantus. She seemed to be fairly under control up to that point, but as soon as she saw those three kids in that room, I'm sure she felt just the oppression and the despair. To me, that looked like the first time she was actually maybe not worried, but definitely disturbed.
Right.
It's Omega. She'll find a way through this. I know that, but boy, I don't know how she's going to do it.
Well, when you said shaken, I thought, wow, Omega is a James Bond martini. She's shaken, but she's not stirred. Right? I think that's pretty apt. Mason, anything else we haven't said about the episode, or are you ready for your letter grade?
No, I think we've covered it.
Okay, well, why don't you start, pal? Why don't you share your letter grade and last minute thoughts on the episode?
Okay, so my letter grade is just a solid A. This wasn't a high up there A+ episode, but it wasn't an A- episode. It was just so good, so I give this one there.
Oh, cool. I almost expected that you were going to give it a B. What is it for you that made it good?
I just really like how much, like Jason's letter, laser focus they put on what they're doing on that certain Bad Batch mission, and then also putting a little bit of that Omega in there.
That's cool. I love that. Well, you surprised me as always. Not for your. I always know your insights will be great, but I never know what you're going to say for the letter grade. So that's great. Jason, what about you?
Well, I started off thinking maybe B+ or A-, and that was. I mean, I loved this whole episode. I loved everything in it. The one thing that bugged me was the very first thing I realized about it when I woke up this morning. I opened up my Disney Plus app on my phone, and I wanted to see how long the episode was, because I feel like the last two have been a little on the shorter side, and I'm really hoping for a little longer duration. And I think this is the shortest episode in the entire series by maybe a minute or so. And I was kind of frustrated with that because I just want to see the Bad Batch. I mean,
sure,
this is arguably my favorite animated series in Star Wars.
Wow.
Yes. I'm not quite sure about that yet, but it's at least tied with Rebels, if not slightly above it.
That's great.
But the more what's that?
That's great. I love that. That's so cool.
Yeah, I've just really been enjoying this series. And so I was a little frustrated with that, but the more I thought about it throughout the day, I think that's actually a good storytelling tool. Because this was such a straight ahead, laser focused type of episode and story, why draw it out? Just make the duration of the show one more aspect of how serious and how, important this mission is. So I'm actually going to end up giving it an A, solid A.
Yep. That's great. I'm happy to hear that. I'm going to give it an extremely generous A-, because I've seen this one 3 times now. So I've seen it a lot. And full disclosure, I've seen the next couple of episodes. And I like mine to be a little more cerebral. I do think there's some wonderful character stuff, especially with Crosshair. He's so nuanced in ways I didn't expect. Kudos to everyone who is working on the Bad Batch, because they are really giving him a lot for us to chew on as fans. It's just basically one great action sequence, and I loved it. I'm here for it. The turbo tank stuff was awesome. Personally, I wouldn't have called the episode Juggernaut. It's turbo tank. Unless it's a metaphor, the Juggernaut is the massive obstacle they have to overcome to get Omega back. I'll take that. So that's just a minor little quibble. But overall, I would give it a nice solid A-. Or not a solid, it's a very generous A-. All right. Well, thank you both, as always, for coming on the show. And thank you all listening for joining us for a cup of coffee as we talk about Star Wars The Bad Batch. We've only got, 4 episodes left. And and it's, boy, I don't want the show to end, but I'm very satisfied with what they've done so far. And I can't wait to see what happens.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is...
Jason, I always look forward to chatting with you in the CWK Cafe, our Facebook group, and when you can join us on CWK Live. You're pretty much one of our mainstays, so that's always appreciated. I always love your insights. And as expected, my friend, you delivered the goods, so thank you for that. Where can people reach out to you if they want to continue the Star Wars conversation with you?
Well, I'd say the CWK Cafe is probably the best place to do that. I'm not a big social media user, so I don't really have a lot of availability there, but I think CWK Cafe and then the live show on Monday nights now.
Yes.
I do like to attend those regularly. It's a big highlight of my week, so I'd say those are the places to find me. And I'm an introvert, so I don't always post a lot of things, but I'm there hanging around the background observing.
Well, great. I love it, and I appreciate you, and I always enjoy your insights. You teach me a lot about Star Wars, so thank you for that.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
And Mason, you always teach me everything about Star Wars and about life and about story and storytelling. Where can people find you, Mason?
On the basketball court.
Well, thanks as always, everybody, for joining us. Look, please join us as Jason said next Monday and share your top 5 moments from Juggernaut, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much as always. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.